The 13th and 12th centuries BC in the eastern Mediterranean marked the peak of what the ancients called the heroic age. This was an era remembered as a permeable reality, a time when monsters roamed the earth and Olympian gods directly intervened in mortal lives. Almost everything we understand about the climax of this era comes from the 8th century BC poet Homer. He mapped out this mythic history in two massive epic poems that act as interconnected halves of a single human tragedy. Looking at the Aegean Sea, this world was dominated by two spheres of influence. On the western shores sat the Mycenaean Greeks, a loose coalition of fiercely independent warrior chieftains. To the east, in Anatolia, the impregnable fortress city of Troy controlled the coastline. But the impending collision between these two superpowers was entirely engineered. Zeus, the king of gods, viewed the mortal world as overcrowded with powerful demigods. To cull their numbers, he used a petty beauty dispute between three goddesses over a golden apple to ignite a global conflict. The spark came when the Trojan prince Paris abducted Helen, the queen of Sparta. Her husband's brother, the restless Mycenaean king Agamemnon, called in a massive geopolitical pact. He summoned dozens of Western kings, demanding they combine their fleets into a single strike force aimed at the Trojan beaches. These were people bred for war. The Greek coalition lived in heavily fortified palatial cities, ruled by military elites who measured their worth in combat, glory, and plunder. A stolen queen was simply the excuse. The thousands of men sailing east were walking into a divine trap perfectly designed to wipe out the greatest generation of heroes. For 10 years, that massive Greek army threw itself against the stone walls of Troy. The conflict degraded into a bloody stalemate, kept alive by the stubborn pride of the commanders and the constant meddling of the gods taking sides. The Greeks' ultimate weapon in this siege was Achilles, a demigod unmatched in speed and strength. But when King Agamemnon insulted his honor over the distribution of war plunder, Achilles stopped fighting. He withdrew his elite troops, allowing the Trojan army to push the weakened Greeks to the brink of destruction. The stalemate breaks only when Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, borrows his armor to terrify the advancing Trojans. In the vicious melee, Patroclus is struck down and killed by the Trojan prince, Hector. The grief completely shatters Achilles. He abandons his boycott, returns to the battlefield in a blind, uncontrollable rage, and slaughters his way through the enemy ranks. After killing Hector in single combat, Achilles ties the prince's corpse to his chariot and drags it through the dirt, desecrating his enemy in full view of the city walls. Even with Hector dead, the city refused to yield. It took the tactical mind of Odysseus to end the war. He ordered the construction of a massive wooden horse, hiding a small strike team inside, and tricked the Trojans into dragging it inside. Under the cover of night, the Greeks emerge and descend into a total massacre. The coalition burns the city to the ground, slaughters the unarmed civilians, and, crucially, defiles the sacred temples of the gods in their bloodlust. The Greeks achieved their goal and cemented their names in history, but the Iliad reveals the terrifying price of that success. Their brutality destroyed their humanity and earned them the eternal, unforgiving wrath of the Olympians they had just offended. The ashes of Troy were barely cold when that divine anger manifested in a violent storm on the open ocean. Homer's second epic, the Odyssey, leaves the battlefield behind entirely. This is a story about the desperate struggle to simply survive the trip home. Odysseus, the mastermind of the Trojan horse, draws the specific hatred of Poseidon, the god of the sea. By blinding one of Poseidon's Cyclops sons on his route back, Odysseus incurs a curse that turns a routine voyage into a decade of torture and exile. The journey systematically breaks down his crew. They are trapped in caves and eaten alive by giants. They wash up on strange islands only to be drugged into swine by the witch goddess Circe. Beyond the physical threats, the men face profound psychological torment. To navigate past the sirens, winged monsters whose hypnotic singing drives mortals to madness, Odysseus must be strapped tightly to the mast of his own ship, begging for release while his crew rows on in silence. The sheer desperation of the voyage forces Odysseus to the very edge of the earth. He performs a blood sacrifice at the gates of the underworld, summoning the restless, miserable ghosts of his fallen brothers in arms, just to ask for directions back to his home in Ithaca. Despite his tactical genius, Odysseus cannot save his men. Between crushing whirlpools, six-headed monsters, and devastating lightning strikes, every single member of his crew is killed by divine retribution. Odysseus carries the weight of a horrific war and 10 years of compounding loss entirely alone. His journey reveals the isolating, traumatic price of surviving the very victory everyone else celebrates. 2 full decades after he left to fight, a rugged, exhausted Odysseus finally wakes up on the shores of his own kingdom. But the peace he fought for is denied. He discovers his palace has been occupied by a vicious pack of noblemen who are devouring his wealth and threatening the lives of his wife, Penelope, and his son. To reclaim his life, the weary traveler reaches back into the darkest parts of himself. Barring the doors of his own great hall, Odysseus drops his disguise, knocks a single arrow, and unleashes the violence of the Trojan War one final time. He slaughters every suitor in the room. Only after the blood is spilled and his family is safely reunited do the gods step in to declare a final binding peace over the island. The divine meddling stops, and the age of mythic heroes quietly closes. Thousands of years later, these 2 poems still define the human experience of conflict. Humanity is entirely capable of tearing the world apart for pride, but the story ends with the quiet, unrelenting endurance required to carry that trauma and finally find a way back home.